Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Jones Day. Today starts Jones Day's panel series, which continues each day of the convention next week. Many months ago, we decided to host this series for two essential reasons. One, we believe it is important to talk about government policies and issues that have had or will have a tremendous impact on our clients, their employees, and the communities in which we live, but where thoughtful, balanced discourse may be lacking. Second, now more than ever, we need people of accomplishment to lead, to discuss matters based on fact, good judgment, and practicality. Quite frankly, as I saw one time in a very, very old Doonesbury cartoon, the world needs adults again. What better way to start this series than with these panelists, led by our very own Ben Ginsberg, who is the epitome of what I'm talking about. Since Ben has appeared on so many networks during these last primary season, I really don't think I need to introduce him to the crowd in this room. So without any further ado, Ben?
Thank you, Chris. So Dan, let me introduce these folks. Dan Balz is the national political correspondent for the Washington Post. He is a veteran reporter and writes the words that many, many in the media follow, and his insights, and especially his on-the-ground reporting, is really extraordinary. Jeff Greenfield is a recovering lawyer.
Never took the bar.
Never took the bar. Not a question I asked, by the way, and has been a reporter for many a network and publication. He has written books, including some great political novels. If you're The Faithless Elector was yours, was it not? These two guys have been at it for a long time and have a wonderful perspective both on this campaign as it's unfolding and how it fits into the arc of history in past campaigns. So what I'd like to start off with, and boy, this is like my fantasy come true, getting to ask you guys questions for a change. I wonder if you could take a look at this campaign, which has been extraordinary in any number of ways, and past campaigns, and give us an idea of how the campaign of 2016 is different, what differences you see, and should we have seen these differences coming?
Start with the historian.
Yeah, right. You can hear me? Is this on? Yes? Okay. I read a lot of alternate histories. What would have happened if? And I was asked a few weeks ago, why don't you do an alternate history about 2016? To which I replied, this is the alternate history. And I meant that quite seriously. I think for any of us who've covered presidential politics for a while, so many of the assumptions that we brought to the campaign have been blown up, that it really is something unique. The one thing about Trump's voters, in all the mistakes that I made that I thought I got early, was there's something that happens in politics very rarely when aggrieved voters find out they have power to do something they didn't know that they had. It becomes a powerful force. The best example is the Schwarzenegger election in California. Nobody in California had ever really thought they could recall a sitting governor. Once they were told they could do that, that combined with their anger at Gray Davis, the then governor, I think helped propel Schwarzenegger in. And once they realized that they could take a person who, by conventional standards, was utterly the fit between Donald Trump and a presidential candidate, by traditional standards, is not great. Once they realized that they could actually tell the establishment, in every sense of the word, we have the power to tell you just how angry we are, I think that helped propel Trump in a way that certainly I didn't expect.
I would endorse everything that Jeff has said about this campaign being unusual to fairly well, and the degree to which probably people like ourselves here and perhaps a lot of you think about presidential campaigns has been kind of blown up by what we've seen, mainly on the Republican side. Trump has been by far the most unconventional candidate we've seen in our lifetimes. He figured out in ways that traditional politicians had not figured out how to dominate modern media. and communicate a message in a language that people found authentic, even from a person who was appealing to a largely kind of white working class audience, though he was a billionaire. He defied all the rules. I think, as Jeff said, there was an audience of voters that existed that in one way or another everybody knew was kind of out there, but had never kind of coalesced into being a real force. I go back to a moment in January of 2015. Peter Hart was doing a focus group in Denver for the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania. And it was a mixed group. It was Republicans, Democrats, Independents. They'd voted for different candidates in 2012. And he, among the things that came through with that, from that, was a resistance to dynastic politics, a resistance to the same old thing, and in particular, great resistance to the idea of Jeb Bush being the Republican nominee, and some resistance to the idea of Hillary Clinton as the Democratic nominee. And it set a tone that I should have, and I suppose others should have picked up on earlier, that if somebody could break through to that kind of voter, that they could go a long way, and Trump's been able to do that. I think the question that we still have is Trump simply an aberration, and that after this election, depending on what happens, we go back to a kind of a normal that we're used to, or has this campaign told us that there is now a different kind of politics that's existing in the country, and as Jeff said, that that the traditional politicians are going to have to wake up to the fact that what they have been doing and saying isn't selling.
Hallie, you've been out on the trail and logged who knows how many thousands of miles doing this, but you've been very careful in all your reporting to talk to lots of voters. Talk about the mood of the voters and what you see and saw at the different events, Trump events, Cruz events, Bush events.
Right, since back in August. And so I think one thing that we've consistently seen, I've been on the campaign trail now for actually coming up on almost a year in the beginning of August. And when you travel around the country and when you're with the different campaigns, not just people from the Donald Trump campaign, but I've been mostly covering Republicans. And one thing that you've seen consistently, repeatedly, is this sense that people want something different. And I think that even with people that supported more traditional candidates, like, let's say, a Jeb Bush, who was considered kind of that old guard, the dynasty candidate, even people who supported him liked that he was trying to push back against the establishment. And so I think that that is like a real strain that you saw. One of the things that we identified at NBC News early on was the idea that Trump supporters, that Trump was not a flash in the pan necessarily. I think that when he first came down those escalator stairs in Trump Tower in June, people thought he was kind of a joke. And in fact, we didn't have a full-time correspondent on him for weeks because we didn't think he was going to do anything. But when you spoke with people, when you talked to his supporters, when you were out at rallies and out at events with him, it became clear very quickly that there was a real movement and real support behind him very early on. I think it took a little while for it to be sort of identified in a quantitative way, and that's why you saw a lot of data being poured into that research. Now, I think we have a very good sense of who his supporters are, at least in the Republican electorate. The question that we have is, how does that translate into a general when you're up against a candidate like a Hillary Clinton?
So let's talk about the state of the race. You've got the ultimate establishment candidate with the gilded resume, including Yale Law School, versus Donald Trump, who does not quite have that resume. And you had polls that showed a great disparity for the longest of time. Now Hillary Clinton has dropped $30 million in unanswered ads in the battleground states, but the polls that have come out this week have showed the race tightening.
Not today.
Not today?
NBC has a poll that shows her well ahead in all the battleground states. One day after the New York Times has the poll showing it not. And the lesson there is just, if you're a crackhead about polls, you will not survive this campaign.
which clearly we all are. So
means your head will explode shortly.
Back to the question of what's the state of the race right now, polls aside.
I think you have to give Secretary Clinton an advantage for two reasons. One is again, in traditional ways, she is better organized and better prepared to run a general election campaign than Donald Trump appears to be. Although I have to say, given what we saw play out yesterday in the Rules Committee and what seems to be happening here, they've got a very tight and good organization here, and perhaps that will show up in the states. But they started this campaign way behind in terms of organizing and getting out and putting the mechanics together. That's one thing. I think the second is that the Electoral College map does favor Democrats. I mean, you've got this blue wall, as my friend Ron Brownstein dubbed it some years ago, of states that the Democrats have won in the last 6 elections. They add up to 242 electoral votes. If you add Florida, you're the President of the United States. The Democratic nominee will have a much easier path, or should I say, more possible paths to 270 electoral votes than Donald Trump will have. Jeff's right. These, you're going to go crazy watching these polls and see conflicting signs in the polls. I would not pay that much attention, even though I'll be writing about a lot of them, until we get through these next several weeks and see how the race settles down after the 2 conventions.
And Trump himself has said repeatedly to me, to us, to others, that he believes that the race isn't really starting until after the convention, which is sort of a stunning admission given that Hillary Clinton has had such a head start, not just with fundraising, but with organization. I don't think that they're where they want to be in the states right now. They've gone through a couple of national political directors. They have somebody in place now who's got a lot of experience, but she has a real head start, which is going to be an advantage. That said, having covered the insane Republican primary for 10 months, that's what a lot of people said about Donald Trump back in September, and here he is as the nominee. And I just don't think that you can underestimate this sort of feeling, and it's a gut thing, and it's not backed up, necessarily by a ton of data right now. But if we continue to see what we've been seeing, like what we saw in France, like what we saw in Paris or Dallas, these huge national tragedies, Trump speaks to something that is very fundamental, that is very much a gut check for people that want to see this immediate emotional response, which is what he gives them, that frankly, Hillary Clinton has a tough time connecting with people on that kind of level on. She, may have policies that are more consistent than Donald Trump or more elaborated than Donald Trump and detailed, but a lot of people across America are looking for that emotional response. That's been, I think, you asked that question about state of play and about what it's been like to be on the ground. I think that's one of the advantages. I'm not home much, but one of the advantages of not being home is that you talk to people outside of Washington and New York, and where I used to live in LA, and it is very different when you're in these conversations and when you're even when you're not talking with people at rallies, when you're out at dinner or you're in a, walking down the street or going to the pharmacy to grab some toiletries or whatever. People are talking about politics already, which sometimes we don't see in previous cycles until like closer to September. And they care, and there's a sense that Trump is connecting with that sort of emotional gut feeling.
One of the signs of this was in the first debate, drew 24 million people, a staggering number, primary debate. 20 million of that was Donald Trump. One of the things about this whole campaign is I think Dan's exactly right. By any conventional standard, demographics, geography, all of that, she should be the odds-on favorite. It's just that, in my view, she is the perfect foil for the Trump campaign. If they had to dream up the right candidate to run against, it's her, because of the dynastic issue, because she symbolizes that insider aspect. I think the speaking fees from Goldman Sachs play a large role in this, and her husband, enriching themselves after coming into the public life to, quote, do good. She said at one point, how could she possibly be the establishment candidate if she's the first woman president? And to me, that shows you a really dangerous blind spot. 20 years ago, that might have been right, but part of the very success of the women's movement is it's not quite as jaw-dropping to imagine a woman president as it might have been 25 years ago. And when you've held the job she's had and been where she's had, whether it's Davos or Goldman Sachs or wherever, of course she's an establishment candidate. In a normal election, her resume would be a feature. I think this time it could well be above. And so while I think if you were betting money, if Jack's Casino took money on the presidential race, you'd probably put a fair amount of it on Hillary, but you'd sure hedge that bet.
Can I add one thing? I was over in Britain a few weeks ago for the Brexit vote, and that was a classic example of what we might be seeing here. I'm not predicting it, but this was a case in which the entire political establishment was telling voters, you cannot leave the European Union. If you do, the sky will fall, you know, Britain will be lost, all kinds of things. You had foreign leaders, including the President of the United States, saying to British voters, you should not do this, do not take this step. It is a dangerous thing to do. And the polls in the final few days looked as though they were going to stay in the European Union. And yet there was, at the grassroots level, an eruption against the political elites. And if, you know, if this is in the battleground states a tight race in those final couple of weeks, if you were Hillary Clinton, you would have to be very, very nervous that there is a vote out there, as was in Britain, that will go against the establishment and in favor of change.
So you all spend a lot of time talking to the strategists for the different campaigns. Let's turn, if we can, for a second to the actual substance, the issues that may take place in the campaigns. What issues would you expect the Trump campaign and then the Clinton campaign to use as they try and differentiate themselves from their opponents? Hallie?
So, I mean, top of mind for me, at least, is national security, especially given what we've seen in Nice and sort of the response that we're seeing from both of the candidates, especially after last week and 2 weeks ago in Dallas, et cetera. I think that is going to be a major theme of the campaign moving forward. Trump has made it foundational to his entire candidacy, the idea that he's the tough one, that he's the one that's going to build a wall, that he's the one that's going to stop Muslims from coming in temporarily. I think that on that topic, I see that as being an area where the Clinton team has and will continue to go after Trump. She's trying to draw a lot of distinctions right now on temperament. She's got a new ad out where there's kids watching things that Donald Trump has said. The Clinton campaign, Democrats believe that that is going to be an incredibly, they hope, effective way to tell people and to convey to people that Trump is not somebody that is fit to be commander-in-chief. That's the foundational strategy of how they're going after him. From a policy perspective, I think she's going to be using the Muslim ban, which is one of his most high-profile policies, if not the most high-profile policy that he suggested that he's not backed away from, to make her point that he is a dangerous leader. I think Trump, on the other hand, will continue to double down, frankly, on that, and it's going to be a real question of how this plays out. Like, I was talking to actually one of your colleagues this morning, Dan, and he said, I wish we could fast forward to the debates. I just want to get to the end of September already and see how this plays out on the debate stage. And I think that is going to be one of the main, battering points that you're going to see between the two of them come September.
I was just thinking that I'm trying to imagine that first debate. I have written fiction. I can't do it. I cannot do it. But to be more serious about this, I think that Hallie's exactly right. The unfitness issue is going to be a major part of the Clinton and her allied PACs, with his own words. They, I think, believe that when you get to the larger electorate, his words will doom him. And I mean words going back to his appearances on the Howard Stern show. That when women hear what he has said, they will simply say, no. I can't get past that kind of behavior. Second thing I think is and whether or not, and I'm not sure about this, you guys might know much better than I, is to what extent is Clinton going to use the much more left progressive themes that are going to emerge in Philadelphia the week after next as her argument to this white working class that seems to be moving in droves to Trump. I think there's a danger here for the Clinton. I think it goes back to the Democrats in the 80s. They always believed that their 5-point program on college loans and stuff was going to win that aggrieved group back.
I'll just make a couple of points. One is, every indication, because of the degree to which a majority of people dislike both of these candidates. We know this is going to be a highly negative campaign, and one in which the main message from each campaign is going to be how bad the alternative is. They're going to try to convince voters that whatever you may think of me, that other person is worse and you should not vote for them. So in some ways, policies will not be as important as issues of character, temperament, honesty, that sort of thing. You can see both of these candidates going right for that. They like to drive that message, and you will hear a lot of that. I think the second thing in terms of the issue matrix, you know, this is a campaign in which each side needs to get out its base. The Democratic base is clear, and the degree to which Hillary Clinton can replicate the Obama coalition, the more likely she's going to be the nominee. And so in some ways, the platform that they have done, a very much Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren platform, they believe will energize that coalition and will bring them out in the polls in November. For Trump, I think that it's been fascinating to me to watch Trump elevate issues that have been kind of just below the surface and turn them into attributes in his battle against Clinton. And I use the issue of globalization as one. I mean, he gave a talk a couple of weeks ago on trade, and his positions on trade are very well known and very long-standing. But I thought it was his framing of the trade issue as one that globalization has failed. And you know, in the normal construct, in the way establishment politicians talk about this, globalization on balance has been good for the world and good for this country. Yes, there are winners and losers, but on balance it's good. He's flipped that around and has basically said there are more losers than winners, or the losers have lost much more than they should have, and we need to do something about it. I think that's an interesting argument to make against Hillary Clinton, who has flipped on the trade issue, on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and has yet to kind of articulate a worldview either in concert with what Trump is talking about or in direct contrast. And I'm going to be curious, again, in the debates, how she's able to deal with that issue compared to how he's talked about it.
Do you believe there will be the traditional 3 presidential debates and vice presidential debates, or something different?
I mean, I don't think anybody could have predicted that Donald Trump would have sat out the, second or third Republican presidential debate and done his own rally where he promised to donate a lot of money to veterans, and then took him 6 months to reveal that he did. So I'm not sure that at this point we can predict. Plans are set, right? We're supposed to.
Well, the plans are set by the Presidential Debate Commission. The candidates have not at all set their plans. They're considered necessary ingredients to that.
One thing I would just note, I mean, when Donald Trump, it became an area of attack for other candidates, for his rivals in the primaries, to go after Trump for not having participated in that debate. So if there is any sign that he might not, I think you'll see the Clinton camp go after him pretty hard. I think he will.
We also don't know the wild card. I suspect it won't happen, but if the Libertarian, if Garrett Johnson shows up at 15%, he's included.
Which is an excuse for the other two not to come.
In 1980, Carter refused to debate when Anderson qualified. So the first debate was just Ronald Reagan and John Anderson.
Right.
And then he fell below the threshold. And I always thought that the key to Ross Perot's 19%, apart from all his money, was he was in the debates.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. I assume we will see something, I would say, in addition to the set structure of the 3 and 1. You know, if you're predicting now, you'd say that structure will last and the candidates will be at all of those debates. But given what the networks have done throughout the primaries of staging other town hall meetings and forums and these sorts of things, I think the exposure of these two candidates will go well beyond the moments of those debates.
And I think that that's something that you're seeing already. It was so striking to me, it has been striking to me to see when you talk about exposure, when you talk about how the candidates are getting their message out, it's not just on the debate stages like we often see. But I look at what happened last night when Donald Trump called into Fox News twice to talk about not just Nice, but his vice presidential pick. Mostly it was the attacks in Paris. And Hillary Clinton also called in and delivered on the phone, which is something we didn't see from her early on in this process. I think that her campaign has quickly learned that when you're going up against somebody like a Donald Trump who is willing to pick up the phone and call into the networks and get immediate media exposure and get on the news cycle, she's increasingly has learned to do the same.
All right, let me put you all on the spot a little bit. Now that Mike Pence is known as Donald Trump's running mate, who is the best, or who are the best Hillary picks for vice president out of the list?
I think Tim Kaine of Virginia is still at or near the top of the list of her choices. You know, he's a safe pick. He's a very competent senator. He's got foreign policy experience. He's got governing experience as a former governor of Virginia. They seem very compatible, as they did when they campaigned together this week. You would have to, I mean, if you were betting, you would say he's probably a little bit ahead. But, you know, I've been wrong on vice presidential picks dating back as long as I've covered politics, so take that with a grain of salt. I would be surprised if she ends up picking Elizabeth Warren. It would be a very popular pick, and there would be a lot of energy created by that, but I would be a little bit surprised. There was talk this week about Tom Vilsack being in the mix, the former governor of Iowa and current agriculture secretary. They have a very good relationship, the two of them, and he's a very serious policy person. Again, I would not necessarily rank him ahead of Kaine. And then you've got, you know, others who we've all talked about, but we don't know how serious they are, Julian Castro and Cory Booker and others like that.
I think the notion of her picking a safe choice is the safe bet. The Hippocratic Oath notion of first do no harm, which is often a vice presidential asset, is particularly true because, for me, you always want to look, when you think about a vice president, as what is it that the president needs? What is it that she's trying to communicate? And if the message is I'm the calm, centered one, and he's solely, completely unpredictable, the safe, kind of boring bet is probably the way to go. I can't see any reason why she needs to do some dramatic, amazing, out-of-the-box pick. In addition to which, to be really practical, a lot of, for me, the best person she could pick with one pesky problem is Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. Great with labor, really good campaigner, very progressive, but he becomes vice president and Governor Kasich puts in a Republican. And if I'm the Clinton people, I'm thinking if I win the presidency and the Senate stays Republican, I'm not sure I want the job. So that's why I think the safe bet's the safe bet.
Yeah, agreed. I think that there's a lot of people who feel very electrified by an Elizabeth Warren ticket, and I think when you saw them appear together, there were a lot of questions like, man, this is great, this is wild, especially among Democrats who felt like she could help with the Bernie coalition. But there's no indication that that's going to happen. I think that the personal chemistry aspect is incredibly important when it comes to a VP pick. I think you saw that with Trump. He gets along incredibly well with Chris Christie, but the sense from some of his campaign advisors was you're kind of two of the same. You both are these sort of tell it like it is, kind of loudmouth guys. And if you want somebody who's going to fill a gap, Christie would not necessarily do that. And so I think that when you are making that calculation, you got to look at the personal chemistry, you got to look at what they add to the actual pairing. And I think that Kaine is, I would be surprised if he wasn't the guy. But then again, who knows?
So final question, the reason we're here, what does Donald Trump need to get out of his convention? What does Hillary Clinton need to get out of her convention the following week? And what does the race look like on Labor Day?
I'll take the Republican convention because I think there's one very clear thing that Donald Trump needs to get out of next week, and that is unity. He needs to come out on Thursday night. He needs to have marginalized, as his team did last night, the rules fight with the delegates. He needs to be able to show that he is able to run an organized, well-run, interesting but not explosive, slightly show-busy but not overly sexy convention that is going to reassure skittish Republicans that he is able to take command at the top of the ticket and he's able to work with people like Paul Ryan and like Mitch McConnell to move forward. I think if they can do that, they'll be successful. I'll tell you this, they're very conscious of the need to be able to present unity. When we have reported recently, this week even, on some of the issues that are happening, you get immediate pushback from the campaign. There's no unity, nobody's upset. Well, people are upset. That's simply not true. That's spin. But they're very conscious of trying to push the narrative that they are bringing the party together. So I think that's what we're going to be looking for on Thursday night.
Yeah, I think that Trump's severest critics have done him a huge service by setting the bar pretty low about what has to come out of this convention. An acceptance speech delivered as written without those inventive ad libs, which he has shown he's able to do. I think people all through the campaign have admired or gone to Trump because of what we talked about. But now he is the nominee of one of the two political parties, one of the two people who will be the next president. And I think at that point they may be looking for something different. And I think the odds are good that he can deliver it. I'm more confused about what the Democrats are going to need to come out of that convention. I mean, they had 4 years ago, the imbalance was enormous. The Republicans had a not very good convention, highlighted by Clint Eastwood and the empty chair. The Democrats, highlighted by Bill Clinton, drove a very clear message. This time, I think the Republicans are going to come out of their convention marginally better than the Democrats will.
It's an interesting notion.
Not that they'll be ahead in the polls; they'll have a better
Right.
convention.
Yeah. I think Hallie's right. The number one goal for the Trump campaign is unity. I think the second, which I think party leaders hope, is that the persona of Donald Trump that emerges through the convention, and not simply his speech, but the testaments that we'll hear from friends and allies of his about who he is as a person, will begin to make people think about him a little bit differently. I mean, he's got this problem of needing to be both unconventional and conventional at the same time. Conventional to kind of reassure a lot of people in the party, as well as other voters, that he's got the temperament and stability to really act as president. Unconventional in a way to continue to say, I'm the change candidate, I'm going to be different, you can count on me to be different. That's not as easily done as it sounds. I think for Clinton, they're going to want to energize. They know that young voters are not wildly enthusiastic about her. They know that young women are not wildly enthusiastic about her. They need that energy. They need to create that in some way. And the other is, I think that that she will need to try to deal with this question of the authenticity question or the honesty question. She needs to find a way to kind of soften those edges and to get people to look at her in a fresh way. I think that's almost impossible for Hillary Clinton because she's been on the national stage for so long, and opinions about her are very well locked in. So whatever changes she can make in the way people look at her will probably be at the margins, but I think that's a goal they're going to have to deal with.
I just have to add one old political story to me that crystallizes what Dan was saying. It goes back 50 years. Abe Beame was running for mayor of New York. Robert Kennedy was cutting a commercial with him when they were talking. It was not going well. And Robert Kennedy said to Beame, look, Abe, you've got to just you've got to tell these people why you want to be mayor. And Abe said, right. What do I say then? It's a true story. And the idea that there are these 8 consultants around Hillary Clinton trying to make her authentic is precisely the problem.
Well, I mean, one of the remarkable things about her candidacy is that, over the course of a year and a half of campaigning, people have a more negative view of her today than they did when she started out. That's not the norm in American politics. A successful nomination campaign generally enhances the image of the winner. And in this case, it hasn't. And so you say the longer people have looked at her, the less they like her. That's not easily undone at a convention or even over the next several months, which is why I go back to the point that she will be most comfortable on the attack. Yeah. Every speech that she has set up as a major foreign policy speech or as this week's speech on unity ends up as a very harsh attack on Donald Trump. I mean, that's the message she wants to drive.
And so when you ask what this race is going to look like on Labor Day, Ben, I mean, I think that you're going to continue to see some of these trend lines. I would also note, the thing that's on my mind also, just not as a plug for NBC, but we have the Olympics coming up in Rio. And I think that between events that happen there, between any security issues that might come up, which is a real concern about, and frankly, between Zika, I think you're going to see a shift towards people coming out of the summer, really focusing on issues that are going to affect them here at home. It's that idea of protecting yourself, protecting your family, and I think that's going to become a real theme, more so than it is now, and people looking at the race a little bit differently come September.
Great insights. Thank you all for this incredibly insightful panel, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.